they began a research project to get all of the documentation on the family that came to the United States in the United States. And they have accomplished a good bit. Plus, Dan is putting together a updated family tree that goes back to Adam. He has fairly well succeeded on the Peroni line as far back as Chris's research. And he has started on the other lines as he is filling in. And the idea that we can take the documentation and
location where the restaurant came to be, there was, it was, and tell me some of those names that start with A.
Arturo, Anthony,
No,
Aquilia.
no. Not, maybe Carlo, maybe Carlo, but
well, it
there
could have been Carlo had a store.
there was, yeah, he had
There
that,
was-
and then he sold it to Joe and Nat.
And then that sold out in Joe and Arturo. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Kept
but
the
there had
restaurant
been
in there.
another location for a grocery store on 10th Street before that one.
It's 1701.
See, I have not been there. That was before my time. But, you know, we need that data.
Well, that was.
And you know, one of the stories we should put in there is about Arthur and LBJ.
That's research that I found big enough.
Well, they used to come to the restaurant and
Arthur
Edwards
has-
and Lucy.
Well, when
Paper after paper after paper.
Lyndon Johnson was a senator and vice president, I don't think it happened when he was president, but he would have Arthur close the restaurant down for his exclusive use. And he would come in and have these big dinners, what have you, and then he would leave without paying.
Without paying.
Sounds like
But so Arthur would send him a bill,
Ah,
you know, and then eventually he would get paid because Lyndon Johnson, I don't know if you knew this, never carried money.
Oh.
And this was before credit cards. So, but in those days, a person's word was good. That's why there have been lawsuits over the use of the name Franzetti.
Huh.
So, well, when Louis Franzetti, my uncle, when he got divorced, his ex-wife went back to the name Franzetti no matter who she had been married to in the interlude. Because you in those days, you could charge anything in Austin to Franzetti and it would go to Judita. So Judita sued her and it set a precedent in the state of Texas that you can use any name you want as long as you're not defrauding anyone. So if I put down that my name was Lyndon Johnson, as long as I was not defrauding anybody, it's legal. You're not required to use a quote unquote
You
birth
mean
name.
without officially changing your name?
You don't have to officially change your name.
That's, I mean, I was
I
told
didn't know
that
you
when
could
we
do that.
changed their
So-
name, they.
Oh, you
Lyndon
just-
Johnson didn't pay his bills at the jewelry store either very well. And still, Fox, they would always tell me, call and say, he would charge cigarette and cigar boxes when he was senator. And he'd go 2 years without paying, but eventually they would get paid. But, you know, they knew they could get away with it, so they just didn't pay. But he was not the only politician. There was a long list of them that would have charge accounts all over, and you know,
Go take care of those now.
they were almost as bad as the well-known doctors in the city.
Well,
Well known.
that was interesting.
There are drinks and snacks if you want to take a break, or do you want
Anybody else?
to?
You're getting all these stories now, aren't you?
yeah, we're
Yeah,
on the
mostly.
As
Wow.
long as you get the substance of them down, I'll make up the rest.
Just like everybody else.
Just delete some of the stuff.
Sugar's related to my mother. And I-
I know.
Marianne?
One thing my mother used to say that Josephine, she was born in 1911, and she said that when they were growing up, they played with the black kids and Mexican kids all the time, and the kids would go to each other's houses and
So
play
you-
and eat a meal with the other family, and the mothers would all, correct or chastise any kid for getting out of line. And that was just acceptable for everyone.
Or
Yeah.
mother.
No one ever imagined to date or marry
The
the other race, but they were all friends.
Mother used to raise us, don't stir up any trouble or anything. They can't help it that they were born black.
Yeah.
Be white.
Okay, let's see if anybody has some.
Enjoy.
Anybody
Enjoy
have
one.
any
Enjoy one.
information on,
Excuse me.
let's see, I think we've gone down most of the list. We've got Angelo Jadita, Giuseppe Bellini, Regina.
Well, when Mother and them came back the second time from Italy, when they left here and
Well, I think they were maybe the only ones who left to return to live in Italy.
Yes, then when
And
they
that's
came
because
back, they
the
went to
Grandpa
Ellis Island.
Salvatore, Grandpa Pasquale, Charlie's father, when his wife died and he was getting older, he had property in Sicily, so he wanted them to go back and inherit that property. And it was right after World War I, so they left in 1919, they got to Sicily, and then the mafia was just going wild around that period. So they got out of Sicily, went up to Malgesso, and he was probably the first Sicilian that lived in Malgesso. And they were there, it took them almost 2 years when they came back to America.
On the waiting list.
In 1920, I guess.
There was a waiting
She
list.
told,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she
Now,
told
what-
a story about when they were on Ellis Island, waiting to be released. Then, because Grandma had the baby,
That's Angelina, yeah.
Angelina, and that's the mother thought that Angelina got ill from being on Ellis Island.
Right.
And then when they got back
Back to
here,
Austin,
she
she
died.
died.
See, this is the thing that what was the procedure? Did they have waiting lists? They couldn't just at random come. They not only had to get the money, they had to wait until.
Yeah, because the war was just over and they had not been here
Number
long
of
enough to
times.
get all their
Well, I'm
citizenship
talking about
papers.
in general.
Oh, I
They
don't
had
know,
to have
Jenna.
sponsors here, didn't they?
There was no immigration law until 1924.
See, they didn't have to,
Okay,
they
so
didn't have
they,
to, there were no quotas
There's
until
no
after
quotas until
World War I.
1924.
okay.
Yeah.
That's,
And so if you had the money to immigrate, you just got on a boat and came.
see, that's new.
Yeah, or you could come through Mexico. A lot of people immigrated from Europe to Mexico and came up through Mexico. Because it was cheaper to go to Mexico than New York. So,
Joy, what were you gonna offer a while ago?
Oh,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, talking about playing with the colored kids, where we lived at the store, that's all I had to play with.
Well, it was Clarksville.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
Clarksville.
We didn't have
And
the,
Sonny used to have a little friend that they'd spend the night with each other,
our parents didn't have the
But
background of
Black,
the
white,
Civil
racial
War,
prejudice.
prejudice, didn't have a prejudice background.
But you know, when
So it
during the
didn't occur.
summertime, these big trucks would come through and pick up all these black people and take them away. And I asked Mom, I said, well, where are they going? She said, they go to work in the fields. Well, after I moved to Schulenburg, I found out what they did.
Yeah, I read that book that Scooter told me about with the Nardeckias, and they worked
Yeah.
on some of those farms. They had
But
some
it took my playmates away. I
really
didn't have
rough
anybody to
stories
play
there.
Let's see, maybe somebody
they came
knows
back.
the answer to this question. Uncle Angelo, his grandfather, when he first came, he left Italy, and his sweetheart happened to be his first cousin, so his mother wouldn't let him marry, and made him marry somebody else.
Maria Montucci.
Yeah, Mantuc, yeah. And they came here, and it didn't last, and they got divorced. He had one daughter, I think it was Giuseppina, and then the mother, Maria Mantuschi, and her daughter went to Argentina, and then Angelo had his sweetheart come over, Aunt Juditha, and they got married here. But we don't, nobody, I've never heard any more details about Maria Mantuski and her daughter Josephine, who went to Argentina. Maybe somebody knows more about that.
Does anybody know if they went to Argentina at the same time?
I always presume they went together, but I don't
That's
know.
a presumption.
Yeah, that's a presumption.
Well, there's a very famous musician,
Jazz
pianist, Carlo Franzetti, from Buenos Aires. He
Oh, right.
lives in New Jersey now. And
Yeah, I've met him.
oh,
Yeah.
you've met him. Is
Yeah.
he related?
He might be.
Because
His
he's
fa-
from Buenos Aires.
Yeah, but that's
Your brother.
what's
I mean,
important is his
cousin.
parents or grandparents came from close to Varese. And so they possibly, but he didn't know enough to be able to be certain that they were. And I think he's visited some of our relatives in Varese.
The other one is a corporate executive with Citibank's International Division in New York. Another Carlo Franzetti.
And there's a Franzetti who, several Franzettis in New Mexico. Taos, there is a woman who is a,
welder,
yes.
artist.
And does other kinds besides welding, and then there's one in Santa Fe.
Well,
And,
the Franzetti name in the area of around Varese is very, very common. And even in the town of Malgesso,
They're like Smith.
it's like Smith, and there's many different Franzetti families that are not related to each other, at least in the previous 6 generations.
Now, if you go to the cemetery, you find that out. They're everywhere.
For sure.
But what's interesting, and it struck me when I went to Croatia, when you listen to Uncle Nat and Agnes and Grandma and the rest of them speak dialect, doesn't sound anything like Italian or any Romance language. But when you go to Croatia, it sounds like Croatian.
Really?
And Nat's nickname was Croat.
Wow. Yeah.
So I've always thought maybe
Well, Croat in Italian is a way of saying hard-headed. Croatian.
oh, maybe so. Okay, well, I didn't know. Anyway, it's interesting. Because they
Well,
all
Chris, one thing that really shocked me was your mother's story about when she went back to Italy.
Yeah.
And the young people would be flabbergasted like I was when she told me she went to the bathroom at someone else's house, the outhouse.
So that was in Malgesso, yeah.
Well, you tell them what she
Well, she went to the back, and then she came back, and they chided her. They chewed her out. What did you do that for? She, you go to our outhouse, not theirs, because they collected all of that for fertilizer for the field.
valuable resource.
Yeah.
You gotta go, you gotta go.
Okay, let me ask this. Besides Aunt Agnes,
One for children, one for non-children.
and I think
Adults.
there's some others of the family who worked as children in the silk factories in Varese. Does anybody know which ones worked in the silk
Oh
factories?
yeah, well, in fact, that's how Grandma Rosa's little sisters died because of that. They worked at home, and they were cottage industries, and they would bring the silkworms and everything home and work at it, and then send it to the factories. And one of the she had a couple of little sisters that both died because they got the silkworm and played with it and caught it in its throat, and then choked on it because it's wrapped in this cocoon. And then the older ones then would go to the factory and do the spinning. But
You need to make sure you write that down.
They never heard of OSHA.
yeah, and so Grandma Rosa, there was one girl and 12 brothers.
Oh, wow.
But she had there were previous Rosas that died young because of the silkworm.
Well, another story Uncle Nat told me over and over was he took a ferry to go to school over a lake or something, and they would give him 1 penny, and he would not use the penny, and he would walk all the way around the lake. and then he could go buy candy at the end of the week with his pennies. Now,
There a lake near Verizon?
Oh, there's lots of lakes, that's the lake country, yeah.
Do any of you know a story Bertha used to tell Teresa and I? Julius LaRosa had that song out where they all played different instruments. Do you know what I'm talking about? The Italian song where they played the flute and this. Bertha said, I know Mrs. Baroni and Judita and all of them would sit in a circle. She remembered how much fun they used to have singing that song and playing the flute or whatever the music. Does anybody
Is it
know
the one
anything?
that goes with the dance?
Well, it's Julius LaRosa sang it. It's something about a compadre and they play different. And she said they just had a ball. Does anybody know anything about that?
I know Daddy was talking about how they used to dance.
Yeah,
And I just had to chuckle thinking of Zianeza dancing.
Rosa, Regina, and Judita dance. But I don't remember Aunt Agnes joining into the dance.
Okay, maybe I probably
She was,
extrapolated that.
funicular?
She was prim and proper to a fault.
Judita used to
The
play
flute
piano.
and different and
Because
she
she played
especially
when I
talked
got
about
married.
Rosa Baroni and
Did
Judita.
Judita?
Said they had fun.
She did what?
She played the piano.
Really?
She also plays one of those
I thought
those little hand, what do they call them, zithers or something? Played that too. I remember playing that today. By the way, one of the pictures I think is the of all the old pictures that I have seen, that I really thought was interesting, when they remodeled Judita's house and turned it into a health clinic. In the room where the hot water heater is, in the wall was a huge photograph of the original living room as furnished. And you can see the way they would have furnished the house. And just as a time capsule, I think that would be an interesting thing to put in the book, because it shows the kind of furniture they had. It's not the way the house was that I remember. So, but it was the way it was originally furnished. And when you look at some of these houses, movies, the way that the Italian families lived in New York and Chicago, same way.
Tapestries.
Well, I don't remember the tapestry in the picture, it might have been. The only tapestries I remember from
Beautiful
Josephine's
Chandelier.
house.
Arthur's house.
The chandelier's at my house.
It's the chandelier at your house.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
I do know that Aunt Agnes told me that Judita was born on the side of the road where her mother was coming in from the fields. That would have been Henrietta. And that her father carried the newborn baby back to town in his pocket.
Oh, no.
In his pocket.
Oh, my.
And that Aunt
Big
Agnes,
pocket.
that was interesting, she always said that Judita was her favorite, because when she came back and forth from the silk factory, the other girls would pick on her, but Judita was big enough to stand up for her. And
Yeah,
of course
she told me
Judita was
that.
big, but you know, some of the things, obviously she got along better with her than with her sister. So,
I remember Arthur and Bertha May pushed
Oh,
her
gosh.
high in the swing in the back. She fell out, the old grandmother.
They tried to go
Isn't
under
that
the
awful?
swing. They were little,
Oh.
and they started pushing it, and they like that, and ran under it. They ran and hid.
I can see that.
Uncle Arthur told me another interesting story, that my grandfather had just bought a new car, and I think it was a car dealer right downtown Congress Avenue or something. And there was another car that had a rag roof and had little windows that you could open. So Uncle Arthur thought he needed a little window. So he got out his pocket knife and cut a little hole in the rag top. And he said that only his mother and my dad saved his life because Grandpa was so mad at him.
I have an interesting story on Daddy. We had that grocery store down right up,
D6.
up by, which one was that?
It was,
Gabriel and 24th?
No, was it Navasota?
Oh, never saw.
Was it Navasota?
come out.
Well, anyhow, we had a grocery store down there. Daddy, there was a house right next to it, and Daddy cut a hole just the size of a dime and went under the house and put a big old some can underneath there, connected it up, and he would drop dimes in that floor until he couldn't hear any more noise from the dimes, and he went down to Covert's and bought a Buick.
Wow.
Took all those dimes down to Covert's and bought a
And
Buick.
That's a good story to put right out.
Okay.
You need to write that one down.
Robert.
It was really interesting.
The thing she forgot
Mother
was
and
that
Dad
they sat in the living room on the floor and counted those dimes. One dime had a hole in it. And that guy made him give him a good dime.
So he bought it with the actual dimes?
He also bought
yeah.
with
Oh, wow.
dimes, one of these big meat counters that has a slant, where you can see the meat. He bought one of those with it too.
Wow.
Well, anyhow, he was careful.
Well, that's a weird piggy, Mike, you know?
Mother and Dad bought the cafe, the down payment with dimes that Mother saved.
No, okay.
Wow.
Well, we need to, your parents' cafe, wasn't it out on Lamar?
Yes,
Yeah,
where the
Jimmy's.
funeral home is.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, we need to write that, we need to
all
get something
kinds of
about that in there.
6100.
Because they used to have parties there.
Yeah.
And I remember going to parties there.
Oh, wow.
Best fried chicken in Texas.
That's right.
Yes, and white cream dress.
Well, and
It was.
Francis used to always make that for the reunions, remember?
Out by where
Um,
the sweet cookie is now.
There was a fight, some Mexicans got in a fight, and Mother was there at the cafe by herself, and she called the police, and they told her to bring them down to the police department.
Thank you, right. Well, now this is a story that I also heard in Malgesso, and the reason they came over here in the first place, at the early 1900s, just before World War I, northern Italy, which is now the most prosperous area of Italy, was about the poorest, and they actually suffered from a disease from just having a diet that was too exclusively based on corn, like polenta. They call them the polentoni. And the poor families in the towns like Malgesso, they would, their normal diet, they would have a salted codfish. That they call it staccato. Yeah, it's like bacalao. And they would hang it above in the center of the table. All the family would just get polenta, and you could not eat the fish. You could touch the polenta to the salted fish to get some flavor. And at the end of the week, they cut up the fish so you could eat the fish too.
Friday.
And then one of the
Friday.
Zia, I think it's Mangelina, who was the mother of Uncle Ned and them.
Convention.
They had chickens, but they never eat the eggs. They would go to market to sell them. And once when she was pregnant, she snuck a couple of eggs and ate them. And she has to say that the cat took them from her.
Cat.
But that, yeah, and she ate a little bit of butter. And then when my mother and her brothers were there in 1919 waiting to come back, they were still very poor. And this is the story of Uncle Joe when he was about 6 years old. And he loved from Austin, he remembered bread with butter and sugar. So he asked for a piece of bread with butter and sugar. And those were very great delicacies then in Malgesso. So they gave him a little piece of bread with just a barely little piece of butter and sugar. And Uncle Joe got that, and he said, "Quel merdini!" And he threw it to the ground. He says, "Don't give me this little piece of shit." He was like 6 years old.
Wow.
That's why they left Malgesso.
He was spoiled American.
That Italian deli restaurant out here on
Mandela.
Mandola's has some of those salted codfish hanging.
Yeah.
If you've never seen one.
Yeah.
By the way, in Scandinavia, it's lutefish instead. And that's what they ate for Christmas Eve with white sauce. And that was the Christmas Eve feast. It's not edible.
Yeah.
What is the, I've heard the connection, there's a connection between our people coming over in the Capitol and doing the terrazzo tile.
Oh, yeah.
Can we talk about that? Does anybody know?
Luigi,
Yeah.
Luigi, Teresa, you want to tell it?
Well, you don't.
Wally do
Well, we just know that Daddy, when Daddy had the cafe downtown, those men that came over heard about Daddy, and they'd go down there and eat. And one night, they took us up there when the cafe closed up and showed us exactly how they did it. And they made Daddy and Mother a beautiful table about that big, about that wide, and then they had the wrought iron.
Wiggle Iron Works
And
makes it, but
we wanted to keep it in Austin, so Sugar's got it. Beautiful.
Mama's daddy and brothers were tall setters.
Yeah.
what?
I couldn't hear.
I said Mama's brothers, Alfred and Robert Pasquale, were tall setters, and her daddy was too.
And my father was a tall setter.
I don't know if they did some of
He
that.
came down and worked in San Antonio.
Did they do that at the Capitol?
Dan has got, one of the things he picked up was a list
Oh, like
of the
the
people who
murals?
worked on the
Yeah.
Capitol.
Because Grandpa did live in Chapel.
And
I thought they were stone.
there are several of them.
Some did the statue.
There are several Franzettis listed, as well as Peroni listed. Now, what Nat said, and what I remember from what Judith said, her father, Judith's father, Henrietta's wife, Henrietta's husband, excuse me, he came over to work on the Capitol as an artisan. If you read Michener's Book of Texas, you know the way they treated all of the workers from Europe. They put them in a compound like they were common laborers. And he did tile work, and he also worked on the friezes of the Capitol. He hated Austin. The food was horrible. He said he wouldn't have fed it to pigs in Italy.
That's because Papa's restaurant wasn't open yet.
And he went back to Italy.
Who is this?
Luigi.
Oh, okay.
Okay. He went back to Italy because he did not like it at all. But you can see the only remaining tile work is in the lieutenant governor's lobby. It's not generally open to the public, but it was uncovered with the fire.
No.
And they have preserved it there. And it's between the lieutenant governor's private suite, you know, their bedroom, and the reception hall. And it's blue and white. It's the only tile work that they know of that's left in the Capitol building. But you can see the friezes everywhere around the
In the
Capitol.
terrazzo floor there in the Capitol?
Yes, but they put the terrazzo on top of the tile.
Yeah, well, that's what my grandfather, Pasquale,
Yeah.
and a couple of the boys worked on that terrazzo floor.
Much of the original floor was pine, according to the architect of the Capitol. And I went up there during the reconstruction with the architect of the Capitol and went from the dome all the way down into the basement several times with him. And I said the original pine floors were covered with terrazzo and in some places with tile. And the only thing that the architect didn't know was that there was a safe in the basement that you could get in to go up to where Austin High is. You didn't know that?
Did you?
Tunnel.
There's a tunnel. There's a tunnel from the Capitol at the basement. Did you know that? You can go
I've been in a tunnel to.
from down in the basement. It was in the treasurer's office. You remember Emma Franzetti?
Yeah.
She worked there. She took me into that. And there's a safe there, walk-in safe. And you could go to the back of the walk-in safe, and then there was another door that you could go into the tunnels that went up under the First Methodist Church right up the street there. And it's a sewer now. You go up to the
Sewer.
direction. How far up it goes, I don't know.
Did
'cause I
y'all
didn't go
find out
far.
the purpose?
It was an escape route.
Why Austin High?
Well, it wasn't, Austin High wasn't there then. But it was just up to where the high school was going up that hill. And it went at least past the First Methodist Church, because I remember when they closed it off at the First Methodist Church, because you could get down in the tunnel at the intersection there. And if you were not a good kid, you could get in the tunnels under Congress Avenue. Charlene, you might remember this. You could get into the gutters under Congress Avenue, and what we would do is we would get those ostrich feathers and stick them out and hit the ladies on their ankles and watch them scream. You can walk all the way from 11th Street all the way down to the river, and that's of course now where the bats come out. But when I was in high school and elementary school, kids did that.
But not you. We all go. Yeah, you were part of that.
Well,
Not you,
I've
though.
done it more than once. I was a kid then. I couldn't do it today. They had a deal on television about that not very long ago, but they didn't tell how kids would slide in, because those gutters were high enough for several of you. Those youngsters over there could have easily slid in. All you had to do was lay down on the street and slide in.
To tell
I have about
one story about the time that I spent in Malgeso with Arturo. And I was there about 3 weeks, and it was extremely interesting for a number of things. But one of the people, they had a store, Arsenio and Felicita, and Gemma was the major domo, so to speak, of the town, and everyone came. And one day I noticed there was an awful lot of activity going on. Of course, I didn't speak English. They didn't speak.
You didn't speak
no,
Italian.
I didn't speak Italian. Anyway, I didn't understand what was going on, but all the excitement was, there was something going on. And finally, Wilfongo got home and told me what the excitement was. Some Sicilians had moved into the town.
Holy moly.
And this goes on, then there goes the neighborhood. They were I always thought that was a myth, but it was real. I saw it.
no. And Agnes told me the only good Sicilian she ever met was Andrew Viscardi.
This is still going on. This is to this day.
Northern Italy would leave the South behind tomorrow if you gave them a vote.
But yeah, I know, but I didn't believe it. But now I do.
It was some relative over there asked us, they couldn't understand, about the conflict between segregation, blacks and whites here. And I think it was in Agnes that Tom said, well, it's just like the Sicilians. They understood immediately. That's okay.
Okay.
Real interesting to me.
Well, did anybody bring any photographs of besides Shuggy, I think she said.
I brought them, but mine are in frames. I'm not leaving them.
No, you don't have to leave them.
I brought them,
Nowadays you
but
can scan them and everything.
you want to see them?
Yeah, why don't we,
Just
Well, I
take a
didn't
picture
know
and
that.
can we,
scan the picture.
does your granddaughter have the capacity to scan some of that stuff
I don't
out for
know,
you?
but
Kind of pictures that we need to get PDFs of with identification. Of course, this is Johnny.
and I don't
This
know
is-
his age or anything there. I think
Well,
it
he looks like he's 18 or so.
was, yeah,
And wedding picture
yes, a daddy
and
mom.
Get the
military
year as close as
pictures.
possible.
Yeah, approximate dates and make sure the names are there.
Example of some of the things that we've been able to do. Judy had a whole set of pictures, including pictures of the daughter of his grandfather, Angelo Franzetti, from the first marriage from Argentina. And there's a letter and an envelope with the address, with a picture of her husband, and his name. He was a tailor in Santa Fe in Argentina, and obviously they were in communication, so she had written a letter to Judita, who was the wife of her father in Texas. So they maintained communication, sent pictures back and forth, and that's the first I've ever seen those photographs, and the first I'd ever known about the name of her husband, his photograph, and actually his profession and address in Argentina. So you might have some kind of hidden things there that are worth, that will help piece together a number of things. In the Catholic Church was St. Charles Borromeo, and he was the Archbishop of Milano, which included all of this area. So he insisted on their keeping records and so forth. So there were good records, and the earliest records that are available in the 1500s have Franzetti's, and the names that I've tracked as far as I could went back to those names in the 1500s. From 1600 into the 1500s, there's a few gaps about who's married to who, and so that's not all as precise. But from about 1620 on, it's pretty exact. And I remember the earliest record was of a Franzetti Pecorado, which means he was a shepherd back in the 1500s. And the Franzetti family then was there in that area for all of this time. And of course, it was not Italy. It changed domains. Milano was its own dukedom. In the time of our grandparents' parents, we have some land transfers, deeds, titles of buying land from our grandparents' parents, which was when Malgeso, Varese, northern Italy was all part of Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So Franz Josef, or in Italian they call him Franco Beppe and Cecchino Beppe, but that's Emperor Franz Josef, and so their deeds and all of that was under Franz Josef. And then the independence movement happened, and that's where you had the beginning of these Italian regiments, and one of the regiments, like say the Marines, were the Alpini, and they were specialized in fighting in the Alps mountains. And so some of our relatives were members of the Alpini. You're telling me that it was a store,
Daddy had a restaurant.
a restaurant
right
called-
down
Her dad and my dad together.
oh, okay, the Alpini. Well, that was after that regiment.
Where the post office annex
Yes,
used to be.
yes.
And he had the mountains
And then
painted.
they moved.
Yeah, with the mountains. And in the, still in Malgeso, there's a special
Yeah, the
monument
door
to the
was-
Alpini regiment, and all of the dead of the Alpinis. And they wore these woolen caps with a feather
I
at the side of the
never knew where
cap.
their name came.
And then the military police, who were sort of the enforcers, sort of like a combination of the Highway Patrol and the FBI, were the Carabinieri. And Uncle Nat was a member of the Carabinieri. And yeah, and so they were the sort of the national police, military police. And some, Uncle Nat, maybe some of the others were involved with the Carabinieri. So that's where I did my research up there. And since everybody's named Franzetti, they distinguish the different families according to certain clans, you might say. And part of our clan were the Janit, and that's explained a little bit at the beginning of the booklet. There's the Takit, the Janit, and those were clans that would go back to an ancestor maybe 3 or 4 generations back, and those who would follow. And because there was not only everybody named Franzetti, but a lot of them had the same first names, they would usually call people by a nickname. And so Uncle Nat was Croat, and my grandmother Rosa was Pedek, and Grandpa Angelo was Pichire, which means little grape. And there's a story of during the war, the First World War, one of the wars, Uncle Angelo was doing service for the draft, and a group of Italian soldiers came through Malgesso, and she ran up and she said, "Are you," all in dialect, "are you soldiers of the king?" And they said, "The king of Italy." "Yes." And she said, "Well, tell me about mi piccire. Tell me about my little grape." And all the other townspeople, of course, they made a joke out of it, and that's how those stories got produced, by things that actually happened. And a number of things happened with Zia Chiara, and because we have her namesake here, but she was the one that every 2 years or 3 years, the cardinal from Milan would come to do the confirmations, and it was a big deal. And so, Zia Chiara was very religious, and so when the cardinal came to Malgesso, they had, for the confirmations, they had them over for some refreshments, coffee and tea, but what they had was roasted chestnuts and wine, and that was sort of their specialty. And so it's, of course, they could tell the story. When they tell it in dialect, everybody would start laughing and couldn't stop laughing. But what she told them was, "Manje, manje, shukrijma." She, eat up, Your Eminence, because whatever you don't eat, we're just going to give it to the pigs. And porche, because yeah. So, but a lot of those stories are based on things that actually happened, probably dressed up a little bit. So.
Well, what about like the Vikings? How are we connected?
There's no connection. The Viscardi name in Sicily, the Vikings, and it's not really the Vikings went to northern France and became the Normans, Normandy, the Northmen. And the Normans, before they conquered England, William the Conqueror, conquered Sicily and drove out the Arabs who were there. And so there were Norman conquerors in Sicily, and a lot of Normans settled in Sicily. And the leader of the Norman brigade was Guiscard, whose Latin name was Viscardi. And so the Viscardi name comes from this Norman conqueror of Sicily. And today in Sicily, you can see people who are very dark, and also people who are red-headed with blue-eyed, going back to the Normans, who were descendants of the Vikings, going back, but it wasn't directly the Vikings, but the Normans who conquered Sicily. And the name Viscardi is from the first Norman conqueror. There's no connection genetically, but just by the name. But the Viscardi name goes back to, it's the Latin version of Robert Guiscard.
You can read about him in any good book.
Yeah, he's buried in Salerno, Robert Guiscard, Roberto Viscardi.
One of the things that we could really use is the address, for example, of the store, the cafe that your parents had together.
Yeah, remember that address?
Was it there where Capital Chevrolet used to be?
Oh, no.
It's right there on the, go ahead.
It was a block.
Block off of Congress.
Was it it was west.
West of Congress, where the, you know
the
where
very
Buttericks
corner.
was? What is there?
So is
The
that Colorado
bank?
Street? What is that?
No, that's
It's where the
there's-
post office annex used to be.
where there was a fountain.
But then they moved across the
And
street.
then they moved Caddy Corner, and it was, I think the bank is There's some bank
I don't
there.
know.
Maybe that, is it where that steakhouse is now?
I think it's where the headliner's that building.
Well, it'd be helpful to get the address of that.
The
That'd be
door
interesting.
was catty corner.
You could go back to an old phone book and find it, or an Austin
I
Direct City
have an old
Directory.
phone book there, but I had never heard the story of that restaurant.
What year did it close?
Teresa,
Uh,
I don't know.
Danny was born
Ooh,
while Mother was working
So
there.
what year was that?
Because he's 6 years younger than I am. I'm born in 32.
So 38.
26.
38. I don't
Is
And
that about right?
he was,
I don't
nobody knew Mother was pregnant. And she had Danny while
Well, she was working.
And she wasn't telling anybody.
Well, not while she was working.
I don't remember what year
So
it was.
1938 City Director or something.
Buttress went in there and then, I don't remember.
I
what it-
think I have a picture of Daddy too,
And it was
behind
the
that
Alpini.
bar, Alpini Cafe. You know, I always thought that was named after their friend from Switzerland, Pete Allardyce. For some reason, that name.
Well,
You had a picture of Pete Allardyce too, Judy.
Oh.
in that.
oh, really?
He painted a lot
Yeah,
of
and one of the
murals.
pictures there on the back says Pete Allardyce. They misspelled Allardyce, but it says, yeah.
Do you remember Pete Allardyce?
Oh, yeah.
And
His wife always wore big hats.
Well, she had that famous dressing that
Oh,
big
yeah.
French
Like
dress.
Yeah,
Martinique,
Yeah,
yeah.
Lama, yeah.
Chiffonade and.
She started making
Yeah,
them in there.
the Martinique, it was poppy seed dressing.
Right, that's right, I remember getting that. What was her name?
Esther.
Esther
I remember
Allardyce.
Esther. Pete had already died, I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that's often piqued my curiosity when you go through Mount Calvary, you see all of these other Italian names who my father could tell you who they were and what their connections to the family
Sure, there was
were.
the Nardecchia.
But I had no earthly idea who these people are. Now, the Stars,
The Stars are related, well,
the
by marriage.
Stars were Henrietta's family.
They were Stellas.
But they changed their name from Stella to Star, and they had Quality Seafood. And
Yeah.
Quality Seafood's still here.
They were from Travagliano, which is right down from Mount
See, and
Jessup.
where did the Teresa, somebody named Teresa in that family?
And-
I don't know where
Teresa was the married Zio Joan, and so they were the Teresa and Giovanni. Joan was the brother of Angelo and Rosa, but stayed in Italy, and she's from a different Franzetti family, but Teresa Franzetti married
I
Joan
wonder
Franzetti.
if that's where they got her
Yeah,
name. I
and
don't know.
their sons was Andrina and Mario. Mario married Azella, if you remember Azella, and Andrina married Beverina.
No.
Yeah,
Well, they came to the
Say them in English.
yeah.
One of the things that's confusing is everybody named their
His
first
mother's
four
name.
children
Right,
after
I
their
Teresa
names.
She
Star.
gave me all that.
It's all
Names keep
mixed up.
repeating and repeating and repeating.
Yeah.
And only if you had a kid, you know, if you had 3 boys, you could have a new name. Or 3 girls, you could have a new name. But if you only had,
But it helps with the research in the family tree, because you can.
If you're trying to find research, then I go as Giovanni,
Yeah,
Franzetti,
For-
and the date he was born.
right, correct.
If I'm trying to find
Well, it
something.
depends, it's, because sometimes they might put it down as John, depending on where your records are.
I've tried and tried, I get nowhere, but I'm a computer.
now, I found
illiterate.
Judita spelled Juidita on the ship manifest where she came to the United States. In the census, it's spelled more ways than I have on one hand. But as we put in this book, the government immigration authority misspelled her name, and she insisted on always spelling it the way it was printed on her immigration documents, G-U-I instead of G-I-U.
Oh, is that right?
And she knew it was misspelled, but she wanted,
She wanted
that was the
consistency.
American way, that's what it would be. So,
If you go back to the every 10-year census and have an idea where the street is, you can pull the street up and get the whole street and who is living there.
Oh, yeah.
My goal is to try to see what Daddy's mother and Daddy look like.
Oh.
Grandparents I've
We'll have to
never
get somebody
known.
to
I'm
go over
sure
to
a lot
Mount
of you-
Jessa and look it up.
I just,
That's really something we ought
I
to
mean,
do,
it's
is get a
just
group tour or
thought
something.
Yeah.
I'm ready. One of the things that we found on San Marcos Street a number of years ago, when we were putting a new roof on one of the houses, there was a box, cardboard box, full of photographs. And Mother and Daddy had no idea, and Louis and Arthur all looked at them. They had no idea who they were. They were white kids, black kids, and pictures in the box, pictures of Congress Avenue that are earlier than anything I have ever seen. And and that's in the Travis County collection now. That whole collection, with the exception of one photograph of the little boy who's naked. They said they would not keep that because he was standing up. He was about 6 years old. Impressive, but anyways, but all of those, very interesting study of the city of Austin. But there's no names, where they came from. So if you're really curious, go up to the Austin Public Library, pull out the Franzetti file. There's 4 meters of files.
Wow.
If I'm not mistaken, I think that's what it said. And so you can look at the pictures, and if you recognize them, please let us know. They may be some of those cousins of Carlo's.
Robert, a friend of mine, I think, went to the University of Texas Library and got a lot of genealogy information.
It's not hard, but don't think that you should always spell George the same way, because no telling how people are. Franzetti the same way to me.
Right.
They misspell it constantly, or correctly spell it.
Yeah.
So, I have one question. Has anybody here besides me heard the story of Angelo riding a horse through the Capitol?
Through the Capitol, no.
I just heard that it happened.
Well, I don't know if it's true or not, but Murray and Uncle Nat tell the story, and Daddy said he thought it was true. When he couldn't get a road paved to his store, and I don't know which store, he was so mad, he said he was going to go see the governor, and they told him it wouldn't do any good, you can't go see the governor, but he said, well, I'm going to go. And they said, well, you can't keep me from going, and he said, well, I'll go. And he rode his horse right up the Capitol steps and went into the Angelo. And they either arrested him or not, depending upon which version of the story you tell. But he did not get to see the governor. But he did ride the horse into the Capitol Rotunda.
Sounds like those Franzettis were persistent.
Well, at least all the roads were paved when I was born.
Search the newspapers. See if
So
it's
I don't know.
I wonder
But you don't know what year that occurred, you know. So, but you know, they were obviously a colorful group. And Chris alluded to this a while ago. The reason everybody came is because they were poor.
Yeah.
Nobody came here because they had a good life there.
No.
And I think we need to remember that. Judita said that, you know, they were so poor, they couldn't afford anything when she came. And I don't know if y'all know this, but there's an article, and I have a copy, the original. She bought more war bonds during World War II than any other single person
out there that have no clue about their heritage. And we have such a rich, full heritage. And, you know, to me, it's a gift from God that we have this to hang on to. And I just want to see it continued. And, you know, if there's anything that we can do, I have a daughter that lives here in Austin now, and there's a lot of things that we could do to continue these gatherings, and I would love to do that. So let me just throw that out. But y'all are so blessed. You young people are so blessed to have such a wonderful heritage. And I think that if you can pass that down to your children, that's the biggest blessing to these people here, the older people here.
You know, my granddaughter had to do a quote-unquote family tree.
And so I helped Claire do it. She's in the 3rd grade. And I said, well, now how far back do you want to go? We only need to get our grandparents' names. So we did that, and I said, well, now would you like to see what a family tree looks like? So I gave her the little book, and then I have a printout of the of my mother's side of the family. And do you know that there were kids in her class who could not fill in their grandparents' names? Now, she goes to a private school. It obviously costs money to go. It's not inexpensive. But they don't know their grandparents. And you know, most of y'all have heard stories not only of your grandparents today, but of your great-grandparents, and in some cases your great-great-grandparents, and aunts and uncles, several greats on added on. I'll tell you one thing, if you didn't know Uncle Nat, you missed a heck of a show. If you know, and each one of them, you know, were very special in different ways. Aunt Agnes could be hard, but she could also be one of the most generous people that I've ever known. But boy, she could shake a fist. And it just boggled my mind that Uncle Nat dug a wine cellar under their house by hand, you know. And that when she was 98 years old, she would go down in the wine cellar to run her washer and dryer, you know.
But by the way, excuse me, just 1 minute. Mike, you want to tell them about Uncle Mike, Aunt Agnes's house? Has anybody been by there lately?
I have. Ann and I went.
No, but Mike.
Well, I drove by there and saw a young man working out in the yard and stopped and introduced myself to him and told him that I knew the people that lived in that house and a little bit about the history of it that I knew, which wasn't that much. But he adores the place and he's taking meticulous care of it. And he's just very respectful of the heritage.
He hasn't changed it.
No, it's the same, except for the fact that there's a monster house where the turkeys used to roam.
Where the blue
You know, Vernon wanted to buy that house. We went right before it was sold and looked at it. He said, why don't we buy that? And it had already sold.
You know, you know, he put the bricks on that house himself.
Well,
That's a frame house that he bricked in.
Right, I heard that.
And,
Really?
right, there's a half a dozen or more houses on 6th Street.
You go right up Teresa Street to get in here.
Well, it is now past 5.
I wish everyone would pick up their chair and take it back into the other room.
Okay, I would give $1 or $2 to any one of you ladies who would model them and let us take
No way. We used to probably wear them.
Was she?
Oh, no.
No, I think I'm too tall.
Seriously, and in the attic, there's this whole chest of underwear. And there's also sheets, pillowcases that she embroidered with fancy embroidery on the sugar sack. Now, girls, I'll bet you there's not a single one of y'all in this room that could probably do that kind of embroidery today and wouldn't do it on silk if you could, and they did it on sugar sacks.
Yep.
Now, you know, and Judy, you've got those beautiful window boxes of Grandma's stuff, and I don't know what we should do with these pantaloons and embroidery things, you know. But sometimes I'll be able to come up with something like that, a display case or something. And they're, I think, safe. But you know, there might be something in writing in those boxes too, but I haven't looked at it since they went there.
I have a question for Father Chris about the history of the Casa name.
Yeah, the Casaragis, that's an aristocratic name in Milan, and there's a Casa who was involved with the Princess of Monaco, if you remember. And the story of the family, which is very believable, is that one of that family had an illegitimate child who was placed in a orphanage in Milano, the Milano Maggiore orphanage. And in those days, in the late 1800s, the orphanage would give children, well, peasant families would come in and take orphan kids, and they would get a monthly stipend from the state to pay for the expenses. So the family, one of the Franzetti family from Malgesso came in and took that child, Carlo, as an orphan, and he grew up. The story is, when he was a young teenager, 15 or so, his true father came back and to bring him back with him to Milano, and he refused. He said, "Oh, this is my real family." And then he grew up and had children. They had children, and that's how the Casaragis got implanted in Malgesso.
And Casaragi was his real parents' name.
Yes, yeah, and that name was kept when he was adopted.
And what is the meaning of Casaragi? Do you know?
It does not have a particular meaning. Yeah.
I've had both Arab people and Indian people give me rough translations, and one of them, and actually I think that was Sandy. So, no?
Okay.
I forget what.
You could create origins for it based on different things, but the name really doesn't have a particular meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Franzetti is probably related to the name France, but that's just a guess. But a lot of Italian names have particular meanings, as in English. So you have somebody named Cooper, that's somebody who makes barrels and so forth. But other names don't always have a meaning. Like Bradley or something.
Is it an Italian? I mean, is it an Italian origin? Do you know that name?
Can you tell from the?
Or
Well, because it's an Italian name. Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
It's just so unusual. People ask me all the time, "What are
Yeah,
you?"
but in Italy, you see Casaraghi, it's not rare. Like my name Viscardi is not rare.
Yeah.
It's not like Johnson, but it's also not rare. They're different. And Franzetti is one of those names which is very regional. So it's especially in the area of Varese and all that area of Lombardy. There's lots of Franzettis. Very few Franzettis who do not originate from that area, if any.
Is that the only area?
To my knowledge, that's the only area where you have Franzettis.
Because my grandmother was a Valsicchi,
Uh-huh.
and that's from, I guess, northern Italy, up there somewhere.
Yeah, but the north has lots of
That's
differences
different.
depending on where in the north.
That's more in the Dolomites.
Udine.
Yeah. You see, that's way over. That's a whole different region. Pasquale is from the.
Yeah, right. Same person.
Yeah. Okay. That's from there.
Well,
Oh, you're Pasquale. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's from Udine, Pordenone, and that's the.
Siqualo. Yeah.
Siqualo. That's right. Yeah. But that's a whole different region.
That's why I can't talk Italian to anybody.
I was gonna ask, how many in here can talk Italian?
I don't talk Italian, but I talk Furlan.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
1, 2, 3.
That's great.
I know a few choice words.
Even the dialect. Dialect spoken in Malgesso, 2 miles away. The other
official translator.
They speak a different version of it that's different enough they can't
Well,
understand 100%.
What was funny was, when I was in Italy a couple of years ago, we went over to Croatia,
Yeah.
and by gosh, there was some over there that I could understand.
Yeah, because the Pordenone dialect is very close to that, some of those
Yeah,
Slavic.
they said it was cross the lake or river
That's
or
right.
whatever.
That's right.
Do you recommend Rosetta Stone?
Yeah, which
It
dialect
doesn't
do you
exist for the dialects, it's only for Italian.
Chris, didn't you put the dialect in Latin?
Well, I got some of it, yeah.
Mother could speak Italian, but they couldn't understand her in Rome.
Get the Rosetta Stone.
You know, in those days, the regions had their own dialects. Now, Roman is standard throughout the country.
Well, they couldn't understand her at all.
It's
There's something funny about Italian. When I went overseas, We stopped at, in Australia for just a few hours and got off the ship, and then they marched us to a soccer field where they put on a soccer demonstration. Well, on the way there, I kept hearing these people. I said, man, they're not speaking English. They're speaking Italian.
Yeah. A lot of Italians in Australia.
Yeah, and come to find out there was a penal colonies, Italian penal colonies.
Oh, no, but a lot of immigrants. We, from Malgesso, some of our cousins went to Australia.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. A lot of Italians went to.
Just marching down the street in Australia and hear Italian, that was weird.
There's Franzetti cousins from Malgesso who live in Australia, yeah.
What part of Australia?
That I don't know. Probably all over.
This-
It's
this
like in
one-
America, they just spread all out.
This was down in Fremantle, down there where they have the big races and everything. Fremantle, Perth, in that area.
And a lot of the Italians have started vineyards, so there's Australian wines.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we were.
Yeah, okay.
But you need to come to my house.
And then straight
This is just a portion of what I've come.
Yes, I will come to your house, to anybody's house, and bring a scanner.
Oh, there you go.
And,
I
see
have
if we
a
can do
scanner.
some of that. But it's just about 3 minutes to 5.
Okay.
If you have any trouble reproducing documents, don't hesitate to give me a telephone call, and we'll send Jerry out or somebody. I'm just teasing Jerry. Josh.
Oh, he's talking about me. I was like,
No, I thought about you. No, Josh. I'm sorry.
he's joshing you.
But anyways, we'll get somebody to make sure they can do it, because, you know, my grandchildren are much better at this modern technology than I am. And so, but before we leave, Jane, since this was your idea, why don't you see if you can wind it up for us and tell us where you think we should go next.
Oh, boy.
I wouldn't ask Mom where to go.
I can't think that fast.
You know, when you first started this, I thought, oh, this is not gonna have much success, and it's gonna be a lot of effort for very little. But I think my initial supposition was wrong.
Well, I think that there is just, it's gratifying, and I particularly enjoy seeing the youngsters here, because this is what they're gonna have to hold on to know where they came from, to know where their roots are. And this is the part, and when we have the reunions, they're nice and everything, but there's not any kind of this exchange.
You got a question?
And I would really like to see some young person pick up the mantling of having a big party reunion. We have places
Well,
that are
Big
basically
Renee
free.
has a wonderful place.
Where?
Some of us have been out there before, and it's
We have,
very
that's
nice.
right.
It's a wonderful gathering, and maybe next time we can even bring some of the pictures along. Since everybody's here, how about?
Put them in the summer so I can go.
In the summer, so quick.
Let's see, one other thing.